corruption. It's killing me. Wonderland is destroyed. My mind is in ruins.
Dust. Because you won't look at what's around you. Your gift is worth nothing.
Authority must be obeyed, or it must be overthrown.
Forget it, Alice. Forget it.
Why do some of the most disturbing indie games follow young female protagonists? And why are they always set in perverse versions of a fairy tale or a wonderland? Hi, I'm That Horror Girl, and I want to talk about how games like Alice in Madness, Rule of Rose, and The Path use storytelling through the eyes of young girls to explore femininity and girlhood through systems of abuse. So before we get into it, I want to preface this video by saying that firstly, I'll be discussing some pretty heavy topics, so if any of these make you uncomfortable, now would be the time to exit. And further, I'll be heavily spoiling all of the games I'm talking about today, and I recommend playing every single one. They're all fantastic. And finally, no AI was used in the making of this video. So yeah, let's get into it. So what is a system of abuse? A system of abuse is a structured pattern of behavior designed to maintain power and control over another person, often using physical and emotional violence as well as financial and legal tactics to create fear and entrapment. Considering the games I'm covering, I will be talking only about Western systems of abuse and particularly capitalism. So I'll be using 4 main societal factors to analyze these games. Firstly is healthcare, mental and physical. Secondly is the justice system and testimonial injustice / disbelief and blame. Third is bodily autonomy and personal power. Fourth, and finally this one I'll only be touching on in the last game just because it typically applies to older women rather than young girls, which is majority of our protagonists, which is caregiving, expectations, and mothering. Alice Madness Returns, released in 2011, is a puzzle adventure game following a 19-year-old Alice Liddell as you try to uncover the truth behind a house fire that left her with deep psychological scars and the death of her parents and younger sister. Playing through the eyes of Alice, you flip between real-world London, which is dark and bleak, and between her Wonderland, now ruled by monsters and madmen. A few things become very clear within the first 10 minutes of playing Alice Madness Returns. Firstly is that her psychologist and caregiver, Dr. Bumby, is trying to make her forget her past, though we don't know why. And secondly, that in her position as an orphaned young girl, she has very little agency and power to change her circumstances among the cruel townsfolk and the men around her. And third, the Wonderland she escapes into is very clearly an introspective battleground for her trauma and her psyche, and that she too is at least somewhat aware of this. So to understand the story of Alice Madness Returns, I first want to talk about the framework on which it was created upon, the original Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll was born in 1832 and later died 1898, aged 65, and his controversy starts with his obsession with the Liddell family. And the story of Alice was created in honor of the real-life Alice Liddell, aged 10. His relationship with her was, however, eventually cut short as her parents asserted that his affection for her had become too great and ceased allowing him to visit. During this time, he was also an avid photographer, mostly of children, some even nude or semi-naked. It is still debated what his true intentions were with Alice and even his nude photographs of children, given the time, but the idea will forever loom over the story of Alice. American McGee, the creator of Alice Madness Returns, uses the character of Alice to explore child exploitation and predation of young women in a similar way that the original author was alleged to have fixated on the original Alice. This is why we are set in the 1800s, and this is why we are set in London. Okay, so Alice Madness Returns is actually a sequel to the first game, titled American McGee's Alice. So I'm going to give you a timeline of all the major events within both games so that when we go back to the story and to the Wonderland portion, we can better understand the psychology of Alice. So we start with the Liddell family, comprised of Alice, her younger sister Lizzie, and their parents. Arthur Liddell, their father, was a tutor at Oxford University where he met an Angus Bumby, who began making frequent visits to their house. Bumby began to grow an unhealthy obsession with Lizzie. Eventually, one night, he breaks into their home and assaults and kills Lizzie. He locks her bedroom door and begins a fire downstairs, killing Alice's parents, leaving only her. Alice falls to insanity by the deaths of her family and survivor's guilt. She is brought to Rutledge Asylum, where she remains tortured and abused by the staff for 10 years. This is when the first game takes place. After Alice is able to defeat the Red Queen in her mind, she is freed from the asylum and placed into Dr. Bumby's care. This is the beginning of Alice Madness Returns. He's now a psychiatrist and runs a home for youth. He spends his time with Alice trying to make her forget anything to do with the night and that fire. And now you're up to date. Alice is 19 years old, but she goes through the abuse of her sister and her incarceration because, well, that's what it is, as she is just reaching adolescence and adulthood. Her journey through Wonderland towards the truth begins in the Vale of Tears, at the edges of her mind's corruption. And this is where we meet the Cheshire Cat. Though as the player we are aware of the horrors about to commence, he is in stark contrast to our surroundings. He's thin and dark, with a devilish grin, and he represents Alice's rational mind. From a game perspective, he exists as a guide. He looks the way he does because he represents the harsh reality of her circumstance. The cat informs us of an infernal train running through Wonderland, destroying it, and Alice is tasked with stopping it. So with the guidance of the cat, we move on to Hatter's Domain. The scenery here is unnatural. I mean that literally, as it's infiltrated by man-made machinery and smog. Very different from where we just left off in the Vale of Tears, as we have now entered the true corruption of Alice's mind. Kind of like how the men in Alice's life have failed her and infiltrated her innocence, we see the forests and the rivers of Wonderland polluted and corrupted by the Industrial Revolution, by man-made corruption. Our third chapter through Wonderland is an ice world, and this is where we meet the carpenter and the walrus. At first, Alice is trusting of them, and we complete their mission in preparation for a big performance. A performance that is revealed to be a ploy by the walrus to sate his never-ending hunger with oysters. The oysters take on the appearance of cabaret women or workers, reminiscent of the women we see in Alice's real-life London, though the oysters appear much more childlike and innocent. It's clear in this interaction then how the walrus represents the insatiable power and hunger oppressing women. They are literally eaten to sate the Victorian society and further represent Dr. Bumby in his rehabilitation program. So from there, we move on to the next chapter after an interaction with a family lawyer back in real life, and we are taken to a world inspired by his office, filled with Chinese and Japanese paraphernalia. This of course mimics the West's obsession with Asia at this time, but also their lack of understanding and fetishization, made clear by the merging of China and Japan's culture, despite obviously massive differences. The point of this chapter is for Alice to find the caterpillar. This was honestly my least favourite, as it lacked a lot of the narrative purpose of the prior and future chapters, but regardless. Alice finally reaches the caterpillar, who makes the first in-game statement about Alice purposefully trying to forget something horrible. And with that, he tells us to find the Queen of Hearts, and we move to the next chapter. The scenery here is quite bloody and dark, and throughout we are being chased by a large card soldier. Just as we are about to reach the Queen of Hearts, Alice eats a cake and grows big enough to crush the guard beneath her feet. This is, of course, her symbolically growing to face her memories and fears earlier in the chapter, and it's perfect timing because once we reach the Queen of Hearts, she is revealed to be Alice's younger sister, Lizzie.
The train is trying to destroy all evidence of your past, and especially the fire. Now, who would want that? Who benefits from your madness?
The destruction of Wonderland is the destruction of me?
Indeed. And vice versa.
What are you doing?
The train must be stopped, but there's more to do. Your view conceals a tragedy. The whole truth you claim to see eludes you because you won't look at what's around you.
And Lizzie directly confronts Alice towards Mr. Bumby's behaviour, and Alice is finally pushed to confront what Dr. Bumby's true intentions with her are and what her sister suffered through, and this ends the chapter. If you remember from the beginning of the game, Alice is residing within Dr. Bumby's children orphanage, and so our next chapter is set in dilapidated playrooms, where we see one of the most horrific sights of the game. The children of the orphanage appear mangled and brutalized, mentally and physically to make them forget. they are shells of their former selves and the perfect targets for child trafficking and sexual exploitation. So, very symbolic, our enemies for this chapter are iterations of baby dolls mixed with hostile machinery. At the end of this chapter, we finally reach the infernal train, and thus our final encounter with Dr. Bumby. Alice switches between talking to key characters from the previous chapters on the train, such as the Hatter and the Caterpillar, and between Dr. Bumby in real-life London. The whole truth is revealed, and we, Alice, finally accept that Dr. Bumby has been sexually abusing Alice's little sister Lizzie, and set the fire himself, trapping her inside. The orphanage he runs further exists to traffic children, where he poses as a psychologist attempting to wipe their memories. She takes his key and turns to leave, though just as the train begins to pull into the station, Alice transforms into her alternate persona and pushes Dr. Bumby onto the oncoming train, where he is hit and presumably killed. Alice exits the station and London is merged with Wonderland and her mind is finally at peace. Though, of course, this type of happy ending wasn't as common for London's exploited young women, and a story like Alice's was far less common. So that is a short-ish summary of the game, and now I want to bring back these 4 societal factors that I mentioned previously. So number 1, Alice clearly suffers from the most obvious form of PTSD you could have. Though in-game we don't see her diagnosed with anything specific, it's obvious through the short time that we spend with her in the asylum she isn't receiving any kind of medical care, unless you count a lobotomy or slugs. Of course, during this era of medicine, women, or much less anyone, received adequate medical care, but the treatments of Alice in many ways does mirror modern society. Firstly, she isn't treated for anything specific, instead umbrellaed by everyone around her through the term mad. This immediately makes me think of women's hysteria, a similar umbrella term used to diagnose women suffering from literally every form of mental illness or even lifestyle choices, sexual orientation. But it also makes me think of other conditions such as endometriosis and PCOS. Especially for young women, an incredibly late or even wrong diagnosis prevents them from receiving adequate medical care due to the gender pain gap, essentially the dismissal of pain or blaming it on periods, etc. And then we have underdiagnosis of autism and ADHD and overly misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression, presumably in a lot of cases, in place of other issues such as menopause, perimenopause, or even BPD or bipolar. And this brings us to our second factor, disbelief. Almost no one around her believes the fire was intentional, and if they do, they believe it was her that started it. I come to liken this to the countless women assaulted without being believed or accused of other irrelevant wrongdoings in retaliation. I mean, I'm sure you're all aware 1 in 5 women are assaulted in their lifetime, and rarely with any consequences for the perpetrators. And when it comes to grooming and molestation of kids, these stats are even harder to track and understand. Disbelief, whether it is medical or based on assault, is a very real issue and results in Alice's isolation. It doesn't matter how correct she is because in the end it's irrelevant to her society. And in the final confrontation with Dr. Bumby, he even states that no one will believe her, which quite frankly is completely true. Her only option for any kind of justice is to resort to violence, but this isn't even an option or is an incredibly risky one when your attacker is stronger and on a higher social standing than you. And so this brings us to our third factor, autonomy and personal power. Alice is surrounded by older men in positions of power, and the women she knows are all oppressed in similar ways. The one woman Alice does know is also exploiting Alice's fragility, and these really are the only 2 options for women when operating in an oppressive society. You can either exist as the oppressor or remain as the oppressed. Of course, as the oppressor, you will never be stronger than the strongest man, often having to push only other women down to get where you are, competing for the same 3 seats at the table. Alice Madness Returns represents systems of abuse that are still alive and well today, showing us how they condemn young women to madness. Rule of Rose by Studio Punchline, inspired by the Grimm brothers, follows another 19-year-old orphan, Jennifer, as she relives the traumatic memory of her time at Rose Garden Orphanage. Our story begins with some backstory on our main character, Jennifer. We find that, of course, both of her parents have died, though we don't know why yet at the beginning of the game. We discover that they were killed in an airship crash, which Jennifer was able to survive thanks to a man on board, Gregory, who previously lost his son, Joshua, to illness. He attaches himself to Jennifer, mistaking her to be his son, Joshua, in his grief, eventually kidnapping her until a girl, Wendy, enables her escape and she is driven to go live at Rose Garden Orphanage. Almost as soon as she arrives, she is kidnapped by the aristocrats, a group of young girls sorted into a social and quite literal hierarchy wherein they all obey the Rose Princess. Though we don't know who this is yet, I'll just give you a quick rundown of the members because this will become important later on. So we have Amanda. She is self-critical and heavily bullied by the other aristocrats with some serious mood swings. Eleanor, heavily introverted and is described as being autistic on the wiki. She is slightly bullied by the other girls due to her lack of social awareness and introverted nature. And then we have Wendy. Before the character of Wendy is fully revealed, she is cruel and demands the bullying of Jennifer and from the other aristocrats. Diana, she is described as the prettiest and most mature of the aristocrats. However, she is especially cruel when it comes to animals within the game, with a special hatred for Jennifer. And finally, Meg. She is kind of an know-it-all and acts superior to the other girls because of it. Meg is, however, considered a coward by the other girls. So every month she discovers that she must give the aristocrats a gift or she will be killed by them. And each month she receives a children's story vaguely outlining what she must retrieve for them. The offerings Jennifer has to give begin to get more and more outrageous, and her relationship with the other aristocrats becomes more and more strained. Finally, after being framed for stealing a stuffed bear, Jennifer finds out that the offering for the month is her companion dog, Brown. The aristocrats eventually do capture and kill Brown, and Jennifer finally confronts each member of the aristocrats in anger. By this point in the game, we have discovered the Rose Princess to be Wendy. Wendy and Jennifer share a past where Wendy was deeply infatuated with Jennifer, but it was mostly unrequited. Wendy eventually grows jealous of Brown and subsequently kills him. The story we are following now is fragments of Jennifer's past trauma, and it's at this point that Gregory becomes extremely relevant. As I briefly mentioned, in between Jennifer's parents dying and her arrival at the orphanage, Jennifer lived with Gregory. However, Gregory, after the death of his son, would project the memory onto Jennifer, forcing her to dress like Joshua, act like Joshua, slowly becoming more and more deranged. Jennifer's only refuge was her friendship with Wendy, her pen pal, though the relationship of course became about obsession and infatuation. Wendy is eventually able to organize Jennifer's escape and transfer to Rose Garden Orphanage. However, this whole time, Wendy has been dressing up as Joshua and appealing to Gregory in order to get him to do what she wants. Once the entire truth has been revealed, Jennifer is able to defeat Gregory and confront Wendy, and this leaves her memory of Paul Brown and the aristocrats behind her, though not before Gregory kills every single orphan. So Rule of Rose, of course, is a dive into the deeply traumatized mind of Jennifer as she tries to make peace with the memories of her childhood. And let's bring back these 4 societal factors from before, starting with healthcare. Obviously, there are some severely deranged characters in this game, the most obvious being Gregory, whom is left untreated and alone since the death of his son, essentially kidnaps Jennifer with genuinely zero repercussions, and this is another failing of the society within the game. With little to no focus on men's mental health, we know from studies, in the case of PTSD and trauma, of course, due to socialization, men are more likely to exhibit aggression, anger, substance abuse, etc. Of course, Gregory is an exaggeration, but his mental condition is a parody of the help available for men's mental health, and further, the lack of protection for young women dealing with these psycho individuals. The way that men's mental health is treated in dismissive ways, ignoring real girly emotion, results in violence and aggression and harms our women. And you're telling me nobody performed a welfare check on her during this time? But anyway, bringing it back to current day, most families we see operate as the nuclear family, with typically 1 generation in the household. Of course, this is me talking about European and predominantly English-speaking households. So this means children in the household really only have 2 sources of guidance. And when you can't trust or rely on your parents, whether they be homeschoolers, or dealing with repressed trauma, or heavily religious, or what have you, As a child, it's hard to even comprehend what's happening around you. Is this okay? Is this normal? You know, the saying, you never really know what's going on in other people's homes is completely true. If a parent wants, they truly can isolate their child from the outside world, stopping them from receiving healthcare and education or life, for whatever reason they have deemed this is necessary. And this is exactly what we see with Jennifer's backstory with Gregory. Gregory is the one with the issue, and the whole orphanage is killed as a result. And Jennifer is irreparably mentally damaged due to lack of healthcare for Gregory combined with patriarchal socialization. And so this brings us to our second factor. The power dynamics of a home are of course heavily tied to the father in the average household, typically holding majority of the financial and physical power. And during the game we are set in a boarding house where the primary figure of power is the male headmaster. And we witness the abuse of the young girls, especially Clara, whom I have not mentioned because she's not part of the aristocrats, but she is an older girl, at the hands of the headmaster. He's able to get away with this, at least seemingly, because of the mentality of the children. They either don't fully understand yet or believe it's normal because this is simply the dynamic they've grown up into. And similar to Dr. Bumby in Alice Madness Returns, he holds almost all the power here, and without definitive proof, it's highly unlikely he will receive any kind of punishment. And we as the viewer painfully understand this, and so does Jennifer as she recalls these painful memories, bringing it back to real life due to society placing men in positions over young women, whether it be for religious reasons, for example a Catholic priest, a headmaster, father, uncle, whatever. Our justice system further allows for this. And not only this, but when these cases actually go to court, in the rare case that they are documented enough to be tried, the wives and mothers face concurrent charges for inadequacy to protect. And I think this article articulates it far better than I can. Quote, formulating CSA, child sexual assault, is a consequence of maternal inadequacies wrongly, albeit effectively, shifts the focus of accountability away from the individual committing the offense and the power asymmetrics endemic to our society that sanction its existence. End quote. Of course, CSA is an extremely diverse crime with countless of different scenarios, different evidence, etc., and is an extremely sensitive subject, but I feel like this is completely worth at least mentioning. This setup also makes the sexual assault of young boys almost completely ignored by our society due to social conditioning, even more so by female abusers. There is a massive lack in true fact and statistic when it comes to a lot of child sexual abuse cases due to the nature of the crime, and with that it's really hard to determine what kind of statistics are relevant, are important, whether they are adequate enough to talk about the point I'm trying to make. So with that, let's just move on to number 3. Autonomy and personal power. The setting of an orphanage perfectly depicts the intense social hierarchical interactions that young women often go through as they make friends and grow up. And being quite young children in the story who aren't yet able to comprehend the very adult themes and abuse around them, they are cruel in unimaginable ways due to their environment and social upbringing within an unmonitored and intrinsically hierarchical setting. And while of course this is exaggerated for the sake of story, some of the things they say to each other and do are eerily similar to some of the things I remember experiencing back in school, and I'm sure every woman is at least somewhat familiar with. There are almost no male characters besides the abusers and those in charge of the girls, and the young boys we do see very briefly in game are much more loftily and seem unbothered. This is due to the devs believing that girls fight more psychologically while boys tend to fight more physically. As adults, we tend to forget how disturbing and cruel children can be to each other, and the devs understood this. Quote, there's a reason that bullying is so bad when you're a kid or a teenager, because we lack the proper social understanding to understand the long-term effects of our actions onto ourselves and others. Quote, the way they fight internally as a unit further reminds me of a corporate capitalist environment. particularly the psychology of Amanda. In the game, before Jennifer's arrival, she is on the lowest tier of the aristocrats, and of course this is a massive blow to her self-esteem and mental health. Though when Jennifer arrives and Amanda subsequently moves up the ladder, she understands that the downfall of the girls around her will bring her up, and she pleasantly indulges in abusing Jennifer in the ways that she was abused. This is incredibly similar to the corporate ladder for women. As I mentioned before, you really only have two options: to either accept your position as a subordinate or to push others down to succeed. Further, their lack of a parental figure, particularly a feminine one, which a lot of girls just don't grow up with, doesn't help with this either. What are you supposed to do when as a young child you're being bullied with no real support? Your personal power is almost always dependent on those around you, especially as a young woman. Rule of Rose is an incredible game that I wish wasn't so insanely hard to get my hands on. Alright, let's move on. The Path, created by Tale of Tales, is a short, creepy Red Riding Hood retelling. It follows 6 sisters from ages 9 to 19 as you play each one on a mission to get to grandmother's house. The game opens by telling you that you must not stray from the path, which is what I did in my first playthrough, only for the game to tell me that I had failed. So let's talk about the forest surrounding the girls. It is filled with various objects that have different connections and cutscenes to the player depending on which sister you're playing. For example, playing as Ginger prompts you to climb up a tree due to her adventurous nature, but will not offer this cutscene to any of the other girls. The forest is dark and unwelcoming, and if you attempt to rush through it, the game will punish you by changing the POV, making it more difficult for you to spot items, which was very, very annoying, but also cool, I guess. So, as I mentioned before, different items for different girls. If you manage to collect all of the items corresponding to the girl that you're playing, you'll unlock rooms within the grandmother's house, which can be explored when you finally reach it. These reveal aspects of the girls' experiences and personalities. Aside from the items, the game will only count your expedition as a success if you encounter their corresponding wolves. They aren't wolves in the traditional sense though, often representing a key aspect of the girl's psyche. Each girl represents a period of adolescence and growing up, with each wolf being said experience, though they are not to be confused with different stages of the same girl due to their extremely different appearances and personalities. So let's talk about the girls themselves. Robin is the youngest at 9 years old. She is light-hearted and full of whimsy. Her arc is about understanding death and her own mortality. This becomes clear in her character interactions with quotes like, "People die. It's hard to imagine for a kid like me. They die and we put them in the ground, like flowers." And, "Young dead bird, not me." To her, she understands that people die, but she's unable to fully comprehend what it means to die. Being the most accurate Red Riding Hood lookalike, her wolf is the only literal wolf, and she fittingly discovers it in the cemetery. By choosing to interact with the wolf, Robin will show no hesitation and playfully jump on its back. Being a wolf, it's not too happy about this and tries shaking her off. When Robin wakes up at the grandmother's house, her head is bent unnaturally, and she's walking with a bit of a limp, implying that she was injured from her encounter. This is reinforced in our final cutscene where we see mangled limbs, so that's Robin. Her experience is an essential part of growing up and not particularly gendered, so I'm gonna leave it there. Of course, you could also make the stretch that the wolf embodies some kind of child predator, wolf in sheep's clothing type of deal, but there really just isn't enough in-game evidence for me to support that theory. So let's move on to Rose. Rose is the second youngest, being just 11 years old, and yet her sisters frequently comment on how she is mature for her age. Rose appears to have a strong connection to the natural world. She welcomes the clouds to the sky, and upon finding the dead bird, remarks on what evil force could have done such a thing. Her wolf comes in the form of a mist-covered floating man whom she must venture out onto a rickety boat to reach. Once reaching him, he makes her float around him before transferring her back to grandmother's house, where she is distraught and burdened in a similar way to Robin. I interpret Rose in also a similar way to Robin in that they are both showing signs of adolescence and childhood egocentrism. In this case for Rose surrounding the environment. She believes only a malevolent force could be the reason for the death of a bird, rather than just a mix of natural selection, predators, or just the natural world. and struggles with religion. There is some heavy religious symbolism in the form of her understanding of death and nature. Quote, "The dead go in the dirt while their souls fly to the sky." But more than this, her struggle with faith becomes clear when the quotes contradict themselves. Earlier we hear her speaking on the malevolent force that could have killed the bird, and yet she also says, quote, "The harmony of nature, the melody of a flower, from the darkness in the light, nothing is bad." I believe her encounter with the Cloud Man was her wandering into a dangerous environment in the pouring rain, using her faith as a shield to believe that she could return unharmed, and yet nature doesn't care, and she was injured or hurt in some other way, causing her to question her faith and her worldview, or at least attempt to answer the age-old question, why does God allow suffering? Her story also plays into our third factor, autonomy and personal power. We hear her frequently referred to as mature for her age. This is a phrase countless young girls all over the world hear all the time. And though it's sometimes not said with ill intent, it plays into the social construct that girls are supposed to grow up faster and be more mature. As a result, in Rose's case, she puts herself in a dangerous situation that she is not emotionally or physically prepared for. She's still 11 years old, and we can tell how young she is from the naivety in her quotes, but perhaps the people in her life she believe she is more mature because young girls are held to a higher standard of compliance and quietness. So that is Rose. Let's move on to Ginger. Ginger, at 13, is the most adventurous of her sisters. Playing as her, we climb trees, spray paint walls, and play with abandoned dolls. We can see from her quotes that she has an incredibly positive outlook on life, saying things like, "There is always a door, and a door can either be open or shut, the difference is me." Ginger's wolf comes to us in a flower field in the form of our girl in white, instead in a red dress. She appears to be playing hide and seek with Ginger, bursting into butterflies anytime Ginger gets close. Eventually they begin to play together, and the girl in red pulls Ginger to the ground, and they laugh together as the camera brings us back to the grandmother's house. Interestingly, Ginger seems to be the only sister that has an objectively positive experience with her wolf. Grandma's house is not as forgiving. Upon entering, we see walls lined with bloody mattresses and black lines covering the rooms, and Ginger covered in barbed wire. So I believe her experience with the wolf is a visual metaphor for Ginger experiencing her first period. The way that the girl in red sneaks up and surprises Ginger makes me think of how a girl's first period is typically unexpected and unprepared for. Of course, this is heavily reinforced by the bloodied mattresses and the barbed wire, showing Ginger seemingly in pain, probably from cramps, growing pains, etc. And I think the black line represents hair growth. Although on my first playthrough I thought Ginger and the girl in red's interaction seemed almost playfully romantic, which I hear is further suspected on chat forums surrounding the game. Though of course the idea isn't nearly as heavily corroborated as the idea that she's experiencing puberty, but both of course can be true at the same time. Okay, and now everybody's favourite character, Ruby. Ruby is 15 years old and the emo out of her sisters. She is the most striking in her appearance due to her ambiguous leg brace. 15 years old and heavily pessimistic, the wiki describes life to her as opening up like a rotten flower of corruption. Through her interactions with the objects, we can tell she is depressed, and further hints multiple times to not believe she will live very long. Quote, "There's such beauty in decay. Rust is lovelier than paint, though I doubt old age will happen to me." And further expressing her interest in trying cigarettes, because, quote, "They say they shorten your life." Ruby's wolf is a young man who we see dragging something rolled up in a rug. Of course, this is a sinister premonition for Ruby and his relationship to her. They sit on a bench together where the man offers her a cigarette and she accepts, and we are taken back to the grandmother's house. Upon entering, we are greeted by rooms filled with black smoke, a school locker room, which eventually leads to a gymnasium, and inside the gym we see the crashed car from the forest, then an engine room with the car engine sounding in the background. And then finally, grandmother's room, where we get imagery of Ruby shattered like a porcelain doll in some unnatural positions. So from all of this, I think we can infer Ruby was involved in some kind of car accident that left her disabled with her leg brace, potentially linked to the man we spoke to earlier. This to me is the precipice of her self-destructive behaviour. When from here she can either choose to continue indulging and force herself to the true edge, perhaps through drugs, self-harm, etc., or she can begin to pull herself up through it all. And from one of the lines I believe we confer, she picks option number 1, stating, "I'll take the path of needles any day." So I want to bring this back to my first factor, the medical system. Lots of young people experience depression and self-destructive behaviors as shown by Ruby, as I'm sure you're probably aware. I realized this was a point of contention in the media for a while. Relatively more women attempt suicide compared to men. However, more men die by suicide as they tend to use more violent methods. Some studies further suggest women are more likely to make an attempt using pharmaceutical methods, i.e. overdosing. It's important to note here that the act of overdosing in terms of a suicide attempt is classified as the lowest bodily integrity breach, meaning it's the least aggressive form of attempt and results in the least amount of bodily damage. Women are less likely to make an attempt with a method that causes them bodily harm or would alter their appearance, which plays into gender psychology, as even at probably the worst point of their lives, they feel like they want to or need to maintain their physical appearance. Even when experiencing depression and thoughts of suicide, women are more likely to seek out forms of social acceptance and desirability, which is also why the study showed that women who were experiencing this factor, lack of social connections and acceptance, were more likely to resort to these more aggressive forms of self-destruction and suicide. So this brings me to a rarely spoken about form of self-harm, not particularly recognized because it is so nuanced. It's called SASI, referring to sex as self-injury, whether it be excelling, lower uses of contraception, multiple partners, or with the expectation of abuse or violence. The list goes on. Of course, this is more common in girls than it is boys, often due to self-worth being equated to physical desirability. Ruby in the path doesn't explicitly experience SASI. In fact, this is actually probably more comparable to Carmen's character, but I believe it's worth mentioning due to the correlation between other methods of self-harm, feelings of anxiety and depression among those who have engaged with or have experienced SASI. Okay, wow, that was a lot. Let's move on to Carmen. Carmen is the second oldest, with an intense self-confidence at 17. She is just coming into her sexuality and physical expression. The wiki tells us that she thinks of herself as a femme fatale, and further that she desires a handsome man with strength that approaches violence. And her intentions in the game reflect this. Her wolf comes in the form of a middle-aged man at a campsite. They drink beer together next to the campfire, and we are returned to grandmother's house crumpled in an unnatural position with a neck injury. Inside grandmother's house, we are greeted with doors marked with X's, like the trees near the campfire, where we come to an empty swimming pool where we can see mattresses stacked with a chair atop them like a throne. We then crawl through a wooded hallway where we can hear some very uncomfortable bedroom sounds that I will spare you from, and once we reach grandmother's room, we get flashes of the woodsman with axes behind him aiming to swing at the viewer. I think it's pretty obvious from Carmen's playthrough that her wolf represents some form of negative experience or even assault, though this isn't clear what to extent and what exactly happened between them. From Carmen's injury when she wakes up and the harsh imagery at the grandmother's house, that she could have maybe even been killed by the woodsman. So Carmen's story brings me back to factor number 2, disbelief and blame in the justice system. Unfortunately, negative experiences are almost inevitable as a woman in our society, and I'm just looking at Australian statistics, but I think I said this earlier about women, 5 women have experienced assault since the age of 15. Where I disagree with the game, however, is how Carmen's experience versus the other girls are framed. While the other girls' wolves represent experiences that almost everybody has to go through in their life, though maybe debatably Ruby, that's neither here nor there, I disagree with the sentiment that Carmen's experience should be viewed in the same way, especially since you fail if not encountering the wolf in the game. It feels pretty wrong to frame Carmen's experience as a necessary step in a complete life and in growing up. But anyway, back on topic. Despite such a large amount of women having experienced assault, violence and abuse, what have you, we only see 1 in 10 offenders end up with a conviction, and this is just 4, by the way. I'm sure you're aware of these stats anyway, but let it just be said, this of course doesn't factor the amount of cases that aren't even reported due to the nature of assault often being in private with no physical evidence to prove the assault unless in extreme conditions or circumstances, victims are often left with the impression that reporting it might be pointless or amount to nothing. And as Hannah from AIFS study puts it, if you think of justice as a rewriting of wrongs, you can never undo the abuse, so you can never be or get adequate compensation or recourse or addressing of the wrongs in any form. It can never undo the justice or the wrongdoing, so any form of justice that exists is just an approximation. It's the best or the closest you can come to acknowledging the depth of the damage from the original wrongdoing. Justice is so specific and can never truly be achieved satisfyingly in such a circumstance, is how a lot of victims feel. And when we get further into how rape culture works, we have those in the justice system saying things like the police themselves were saying, you know, it's just not worth putting yourself through it. You could go through it, but he's just going to get off, and it's one word against the other, and you know, basically the system doesn't, quote, I got the impression from their point of view, the system doesn't work in these cases. Quote, which sometimes I can absolutely see where they're coming from, because once the public is made aware of your situation, victims can be subject to heavy scrutiny, especially when they aren't the perfect victim. And combined with the low rate of conviction, for example, the way that Carmen is described in her description by the dev almost borders on an explanation for her assault, even though it is far from it. Whether that was a conscious decision on their part or not, the fact of the matter remains, it perpetuates the idea that only promiscuous women get raped. Unfortunately, Carmen is one of many in our society. So let's move on to our final sister, Scarlett. Scarlett is 19. And it's with her I feel as though I should mention that the girls don't particularly have a mother figure in their lives. This is where Scarlett comes in. She is incredibly organized and responsible and in charge of her 5 younger siblings. She doesn't like nature, finding it to be too messy, and one of her key lines is, quote, the panic that consumes you is the fear of order. Though she does exhibit an intense fondness for music, particularly piano. We encounter her wolf in the ruined theatre. On the stage of the theatre is a piano, and when Scarlett sits down to play, a white-haired lady comes by, presumably teaching her how to play. The curtain closes on their lesson, and we are brought, once again, for the final time, to the grandmother's house. Once inside, we see jars neatly organized all over the floor. Furniture is under covers, and the house is surrounded in a green mist. In grandmother's room, we get flashes of Scarlett in the position of a puppet on strings, images of her wolf, and some other cryptic images I can't really reliably understand. So this is the first game and character where I feel like it's time to talk about the expectation and mothering of it all. Our secret 4th factor. There are 2 aspects to this, first being eldest daughter syndrome, which is what Scarlett is explicitly experiencing, and motherhood as a primary expectation of young adults. So eldest daughter syndrome is when the eldest daughter is given caretaking responsibilities over other siblings involving a lot of physical and emotional labor. Growing up in this kind of environment often leads to the need for perfectionism and control. We see this in Scarlett in her dislike of nature, saying it's too messy. Further, Scarlett has issues with her identity. We can tell she has a deep appreciation for music, but she has no real means in which to pursue it, even maybe as a hobby if her time is taken up for her siblings. While parentification can also absolutely happen to the eldest son, it often lacks the additional emotional burden, instead leaning further into the financial and physical burdens. Further, in grandmother's house we see the furniture is unused and still in the cupboards. I feel like this symbolizes that Scarlett is unable to truly indulge herself in her own life, or at least feels like she can't due to her responsibilities, and thus she has no time to sit on the furniture she owns. The final scenes of grandmother's house bring me to a different expectation pushed upon Scarlett, which is mothering. I firmly believe that becoming a mother, a good mother, is one of the hardest things you could do, and not everyone is cut out to become one. The pressure to have children is probably the most prevalent in pervasive gender expectation we put upon women. It is reinforced through religion, patriarchy, capitalism, you name it. It is so important that women have a choice in becoming mothers because, well, what happens when they don't? First of all, let's talk about pregnancy. Your body is potentially permanently altered, the risk of developing illnesses you've never heard of before or never had, even potentially allergies. I'm sure you're all familiar with the girl with the list. Then after pregnancy, postpartum depression, possibly more kids in the foster system if that's what you chose, resentment, socioeconomic hardship. And when you as a woman are forced into having and keeping a child you do not want, that you cannot afford, it's going to potentially cause irreparable damage to your child as well as your own psyche. For what? To offset an aging population and continue making workers for capitalism to exploit? Oh no, when our youth population drops off, we might actually have to pay our remaining workers fairly. Okay. Anyways, that is all the 6 sisters from The Path. What I love about this game is how it doesn't glorify childhood and adolescence. These are some of the hardest parts of your life and are scary and unknowing. You aren't in control of your body, you're too young to live by yourself and to have true autonomy, but you still have to somehow find yourself and mature. These realizations, especially the ones that are gendered, are truly horrifying, and sometimes you think it would be better to follow the path and to live in ignorance, but the game encourages the exploration of female adolescence and the inevitable pain of it all. I think it has some great commentary about the modern world of gendered norms and of the female experience. I couldn't recommend looking into yourself enough because there are so many things I didn't even mention. It is packed with symbolism. Looking at these games as a collective, firstly, I want to acknowledge how they were all released between 2003 and 2011, post-second wave feminism and almost perfectly during third wave feminism, during the rise of post-feminism. Post-feminism is a complex term, can imply we have moved beyond feminism, either because its goals were achieved or because younger generations view traditional feminist movements as outdated, which I can tell you right now I strictly disagree with, and the notion is harmful and insulting. While each game takes place during different periods of time, they all operate within an extremely similar social setting and patriarchy. There are 2 kinds of patriarchy, private and public, being depicted, that is to say, in public patriarchy, women are not excluded from certain areas of society, unlike in private patriarchy, but rather subordinates women in all of them. All of our game protagonists exist as subordinates to men or a higher power in some aspect, with the fate of our girls completely tied to them. Looking at our protagonists, they are all conventionally attractive and are treated in game as such, or at least their appearance is uncommented on, and we can visibly see through side characters such as Amanda how perceived unattractiveness essentially labels her as worthless to society. In return, she is forced in competition against other girls trying to bring them down with her rather than the untouchable system around her that enables this. And attractiveness in our game also harms our protagonists because now they are susceptible to power imbalances of their perceived caretakers taking advantage of their ignorance and position. These games don't romanticize puberty and adolescence because in real life it is everything but. It is a painful wake-up call to society, to our bodies, and to how the world will begin to treat us. Society teaches us to want to be attractive, to desire it, but these games show us, especially Carmen's character in The Path, how not only society will punish us for embracing this femininity, but further blame us for its alleged provocation of assault or rape. These games, being released post-second wave, depict the beginnings of third wave feminist ideals of sexual freedom, addressing culture, sexual harassment, and an attempted reclaiming of girliness. While not quite addressing some of the later themes of third wave feminism like intersectionality and gender expression, Alice in Madness shows us how power dynamics in healthcare systems take advantage of and exploit women and children. Rule of Rose shows us how social conditioning pits women against each other while neglecting men in a way that furthers the harming of women. And finally, The Path shows us these issues that third wave feminism hopes to erase, allowing women back into their femininity if that is what they want, and not treated as caretakers with the expectation of motherhood. These games integrate the worst of humanity and inject them into children and the adults around them. It is no wonder how almost all these games are, or at least were when they were released, so controversial and even banned in some places. Nobody wants to accept the realities of child sexual abuse, children torturing children, and the horrors of womanhood. But now that these games are known about and analysed, we can understand that they contain something so raw and revealing about humanity, and I believe now that's why they're considered such important cult classics and have gained popularity, especially in their female audiences. I hope you found what I had to say is at least interesting, maybe you want to play these games now. I'm always open to feedback. Let me know what you thought about the structure, etc. I have all of my sources that I use to research for this video down below if you're interested in that stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you love these games now as much as I do. This is That Horror Girl. Bye. What? No, that sounds terrible. Any of these? Of any of these? You uncomfortable? Any of this? Oh my god. Operating within an impressive precise.